all this power in it.
There we go. Okay. All right, let's get started. So thanks everyone for coming today. We're going to have a talk with Sam about reimagining socializing for twice exceptional students. I think I know most of you, but for those that I don't, I'm Mina, co-founder of Square Peg Union. Carly, who's my other co-founder, and I met in an OT waiting room while we waited for our boys that were 6 years old at the time. And about 2 years ago, we started Square Peg because we just kept in touch all this time and like was trying to figure out what to do with our kids, and you know how it is. So we encourage the community to host meetups and connect with other families going through the same thing. So we've had a few already and they've been pretty good. The last one was 2.5 hours. We were talking about anxiety and school refusal and resources, and it was epic. Actually, we came away like it was a big love fest because it's nice to be able to go somewhere where they understand what you're saying, and when you pick a topic and you do it around that topic, people come for that topic, and it's even deeper than like just a general meetup would be. So and then if you don't have time to host a meetup, you can always email me and I can match you up with different families. Like I just had a mom do it the other day, and I asked all the other parents that I knew going through similar things, and they just jumped in and sent over resource. It was amazing. I just adored them all. Our website is squarepemunion.com, and I'm going to turn it over to Sam, who's at Young Scholars Academy. My son Archer went to the D&D class that he had, and it was really great. It was super fun, and there's so much detail involved there. I don't know how the instructor does it, but she totally can wrangle those kids because there's endless negotiations in there. So anyway, go ahead, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mina, and thank you to the Square Peg families. A big shout out to Mina for everything that you're doing, because I think that, as you said, just hosting places where people can come together, maybe not even seek wisdom and just seek comfort and seek solidarity and validation. I think that's incredibly important. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with you all. Just a quick elevator pitch so you know who I am and why I may or may not be qualified to talk. Some of you might just hang it up right now, and that's fine. So my name's Sam Young, and I taught at a school called Bridges Academy for about 10 years. I am a twice exceptional person myself, and I run a virtual enrichment school that I started for twice exceptional kids. I'm a two-time Fulbright scholar with a master's degree in cognitive diversity in education, surprise to no one. And I studied under Dr. Susan Baum, and really have been excited to be in the space and thrilled to help people. And my whole life's work is really dedicated to helping the young version of myself not go through the deficit-based system. So helping your kids avoid being defined by their struggles and leaning into their strengths. And so tonight we're going to be getting into everything about socializing and making a shift in ourselves as adults, as parents, and helping our kids internalize and own that shift as well. So with that being said, I'm going to screen share, and I want to ask you all to just let me know that you can actually see the darn thing, because I can't tell you how many times I've spoken at a summit and I'm like, as you can see, and everyone's like, actually, no, we cannot. So here's my screen. Can you see that all right?
Yeah, it looks great.
All right, awesome. Okay, excellent. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And again, I appreciate anyone, if you can, when you can, join us on camera. It's a heck of a lot more fun. I have a couple activities along the way tonight. And the way that I'm really hoping to engage is to have these different activities along the way and then have a big Q&A at the end. Also, if I mute a couple times, I'm sorry, I'm sick. So forgive me, I've got tea and we're ready to kick some butt here and have some fun. So that being said, let us get into gear. So my first point that I'd really like to make on this evening is that we are in a once in a century moment, right? We are in the wake of this COVID pandemic that seems like it doesn't quite ever end. And we're in a moment in time when things are shifting. And I think a lot of us have not necessarily shifted with COVID, with the changes. I think many parents are feeling like some serious social ground has been locked and like this chain is snapped apart, and we're having trouble regaining that ground. And today we're going to unpack that. And I want to encourage everybody here. I know you're busy, but I want to encourage you to stick around to the end. I'm going to give you a ton of wisdom. I'm also going to share a little freebie resource which captures the big hitters in a PDF at the end, so that you don't have to busy yourself writing everything down unless that helps. So let's go ahead and take a little look through our combo tonight. We're going to do 4 big things. We're going to first explore these twice exceptional students. We're going to talk about what twice exceptional means. We're going to talk about the socializing shift that I just alluded to, number two. Number three, we're going to sort of psychologically and neurologically cut to the core and look at some of the research and the happenings behind the scenes. And then number four, I'm going to give you where the rubber meets the road, 10 strategies and solutions to help your kiddo socialize around their strengths and interests and talents in a way that's meaningful and fulfilling. So we're going starting broad and tapering down. So let's go ahead over to number one. In the very beginning, just understanding who these twice exceptional people are. And we're going to look at a definition in just a moment, but I think sometimes having this idea visual of maybe people that you know, think of a Simone Biles, a Greta Thunberg, a Richard Branson, people who have exceptional strengths in some areas and perhaps exceptional struggles in others, right? Being a world-class gymnast with more medals than I could probably carry and having ADHD would be a profile of someone like a Simone Biles who might fit into our definition. And while there's no perfect definition, this is one that was created before there was even a word. If you look at the early research, this is Dr. Susan Baum, who I studied under, and in a book called To Be Gifted and Learning Disabled, which perfectly describes, I think, what twice exceptional means, she said that twice exceptional individuals evidence ability and disability, which result in a unique set of circumstances. Their exceptional ability may dominate their disability or difference. Their disability or difference may dominate their ability, or they may mutually cover one another. And we're going to talk about these in just a moment and understand all three profiles. But for my visual folks, I want you to think, picture in your mind's eye someone who's maybe gifted. Maybe they're highly verbal, they're creative, they might be schoolhouse gifted or artistic, they might be a leader or an athlete. And then at the same time, they have ADHD or autism or dyscalculia or auditory processing struggles, etc. Right? It's these two exceptional profiles that make the two exceptionalities. And if you think of a bell curve, a lot of the times I think we like to plot someone on one end or the other, right? That they have two standard deviations over in intelligence, high IQ, gifted, or they're two standard deviations over and they're having serious difficulties, right? The reality is that the twice exceptional profile is both. It's an and, not an or. And this is incredibly important. Again, for my visual peeps, I'm one, so I try to speak to you. When we think about that bell curve, another visual is, well, it's the two colors combining, right? In that same reference material that I said, Dr. Susan Baum's book, To Be Learning, Learning Difference and Gifted, you have yellow, blue, and green, right? And this is really important. And parents, if you're a little distracted, if you're triple multitasking, I want to have you have a moment of clarity. Come to me for a moment here. Our kids that are twice exceptional, that have these profiles, have areas where they have strengths. They have these strength areas. They also have these struggle areas, complex challenges, complex strengths, and they are always green. This is a difficult pill to swallow for a moment, but I want to be crystal clear. They always have both. The only thing that changes is the context. Okay? If you have a child who is incredibly talented, I go back to the Greta Thunberg example, or the Simone Biles example, right? Incredibly talented in one area and struggling in another, that is the same child. They have the same profile. They have the strengths, they have the struggles. The only thing that might change is you might put Simone Biles on the gym mat, or you might put Greta Thunberg in front of the United Nations, right? And the child is not changing, these settings are. And this is kind of two funny things here. And I'm really excited to be a part of this group because our logo was designed after this. If you look, it's the colors, right? So the strengths, yellow, the blue, challenges, and then the child is green. And what I love about the name of your group is that it's designed to be a square peg in a round hole, right? So the idea is that our kids have these edges that stick out. And one of the big takeaways, any of my type A note takers, if you're writing something down, one of my big takeaways for you is to not shave your kids' edges off. There's a lot of pressure to round their edges out, to have them fit in, to do what other neurotypical kids are doing in their age group. And I'd like to encourage you tonight to not do that. And I'm going to talk about why. Let's go a little backward before we go forward, though. So talking about, by the way, I try to use really bright colors because it's late and I want to get your attention. So, the masking concept, okay? This idea I mentioned previously, we can have these different kinds, right? Where strengths mask struggles. This is called masking, where struggles mask strengths, or where you have a mutual masking, right? An example, again, think of someone who's highly verbal but doesn't turn in their work. What happens? They often get labeled as lazy. In reality, they might have difficulty with being a producer because maybe the act of writing is too difficult for them, or their dysgraphia or something like that. It is not a smart and lazy kid. That is a smart kid that is trying and simply maybe cannot produce because of the demands. Okay, so again, thinking asynchronous, it's important. Why do I share this with you? Because we always want to be on the lookout. You might have a kiddo who you think is gifted. You might have a kiddo who you think has learning differences. And what I'm saying to you tonight is to be on the lookout for both, because they might exhibit both in certain settings. And this is really important when we talk socializing, because there may be more than what you think is going on that's going on. And my parents, I'd like to ask you to go and be a detective. Can you be curious? Can you look for places where they might be appearing one way and appearing perhaps another? So all this is to get us into our conversation about socializing. I just want to clarify that, we're talking about these asynchronous kiddos who have these really unique profiles. Again, masking the gift, masking the difficulty, and this kind of dual masking. Okay. I'm going to segue over into part two. I mentioned at the top that there is a sort of a trend in socializing that this kind of changed and that we may not have as a result of COVID. And if you would grant me, I'm going to take a quick tea break here. Okay, appreciate you. Thank you. So there's a big shift that's happening, and I think we should address, students were really isolated, right? I think parents are concerned. Students were isolated for some time, and they went in different places. It's kind of like water, right? We are all meeting our needs. We're just taking different pathways, right? And so when COVID happened, I think a lot of our students started using screens more. We did too. They're using different technology. They're interacting in ways. You are too, by the way. Maybe before COVID, you would never have joined an online, whatever a Zoom is, right? You might not have done this years ago, and now you are. So we've changed. The reality is that the struggles aren't totally equal, and many neurodivergent kids struggle more or maybe struggle differently in ways that we might not have seen. And I could take this further. I mean, impoverished families, families of color, LGBTQ plus people, definitely struggling was not evenly dispersed throughout this pandemic. And I think it's important to address that in any conversation. But I think on the one hand, well, there were difficulties, there were silver linings, right? And if we look for them and we lean into them, we might find that there are actually ways which our kids can better socialize as a result of some of the changes that happen. So I'd like to ask any of you who came here with a feeling like you want things to go back to the way they were, maybe to suspend that and leave that luggage at the door for a moment and keep an open mind. Now, when we talk about these kinds of things, I think like most things, have you ever noticed this, by the way? Most conversations, you think you're going to learn about one thing and it's really about you like changing your perspective. Right? Like this conversation is like 10 tips for you to learn about socializing. And I'm going to ask you to make some changes yourselves. Sorry. 3 things that typically happen when we talk about socializing. And this is where I want you to like take a finger and put it on the pulse and figure out where you are. A lot of the times we'll compare ourselves to our kiddos and maybe struggle to connect. I had an easy go of it. I was popular. I was social. I had friends. It's maybe too far from home. The second group, maybe it's, I got the balloons. Have you seen this, by the way? There's this new Zoom thing. Look, I can get the hearts too. Look at that. I think you only get it if you're the host. Sorry. Great power. Love that stuff. My kids go nuts every time that happens. The second group is maybe it's too close to home, right? Maybe their experience is triggering for us. It reminds us of the way things were, or perhaps we're in group 3 and we don't really know like how to help or what to do or where to start, right? You don't have to be in just one group, by the way. And if anyone's comfortable, I'd love to engage in the chat. If anyone's like, I'm a 1, I'm a 2, I'm a 3, I welcome that. It's a safe place here, no judgment. I think for a lot of us, like I often identify as a 1. I was incredibly ADHD when I was young. I could not read. I could not do a lot of things. So I masked by being charming. I was very social, but I got in trouble a lot too. So a lot of us we're in different categories or maybe a couple. Interesting how you said different groups too for different kids. So I want to just share this with you because to parents in group 1, if you identify as a 1, I want you to just remember like things are different, right? And paying attention to the way things were can be challenging. Things have changed, people have changed, and my generation, I'm millennial, the last generation that grew up like without tech, we grew into tech, right? Our kids now are growing up with tech, and I think it's really important to be aware of that, like that they're developing almost like this kind of symbiotic relationship. right? They're developing this relationship with tech, and that's incredibly different. So if you feel like it's too far away for you, partially it's because we're growing up at a different time. And parents in group two, I want you to know that that's okay too. Like we have to a lot of times do our own self work and like check in with ourselves and see like what are the things for our students. Our goals a lot of the times to help our students, have better lives than we did, right? So if something is triggering for us or difficult for us, maybe we do the work. We talked with a professional, or we kind of figure out like why am I feeling these big feelings and what's maybe unresolved or something that we want to work on ourselves so that we can help our kids and model, right? And be in a place where we're open and we're holding space for them. And if we zoom out a little bit, again, thinking about how the pandemic has changed things, yes, it's true that like things have changed, but also there's always been like a mainstream and another, right? Like before the pandemic, before computers, there was Dungeons and Dragons. Right, we're talking about that in the beginning. Like there have always been like kind of culture and counterculture, right? And a lot of our neurodivergent kids have often fit into this kind of counterculture, this other stream. And it's really important to keep that in mind because I think a lot of the times we're worried about our kids, not doing what others are doing or like going in a different direction or maybe using tech a lot. And I think, well, that's important. We should be concerned about tech usage. The reality is that we can take caution, but also realize that maybe they're meeting needs in just unconventional ways. And that, well, the times are changing. Yes, but there's also just kind of like different interest groups, and what your kids do may not be aligned with what you do. And by the way, just to play devil's advocate, because I love to, but what our kids are doing might actually be more aligned with the future, right? Like there's a very good chance that, not being too dramatic, but like the way that our kids are interacting may be the future. People may use VR headsets to see movies together from home. We may, I have a friend that works at Sotheby's, and there's like a massive expenditure for Sotheby's right now to develop online real estate platforms where you can like put on a VR headset and go into a space and do real estate dealings online in virtual reality and maybe even in the cryptoverse. So I just share this to say that like also we have to kind of let go of like how we think things ought to be because we might be outdated. Tough pill to swallow, sorry. But what our kids are doing may be more in line with the future. Now, I like to use humor here, but we're gonna move right along. But I just want to share one thing because a lot of times we were quick to think like, what are my kids doing? They're playing Minecraft or they're like looking into this like cryptocurrency stuff or whatever it might be. And I share this with you because I'm really big into cryptocurrency. And one of the developers of maybe you've heard of Ethereum, it's the second biggest market cap cryptocurrency, was created by Vitalik Buterin at the age of, I believe, 19. And it is now the second largest cryptocurrency in the world and has a GDP that's higher than most countries. Um, he says this: I saw everything to do with either government regulation or corporate control as just being plain evil. And I assured that people in those institutions, I assume, sorry, people in those institutions were kind of like Mr. Burns, any Simpsons fans know, sitting behind their desks saying, excellent, how can I screw thousands of people over this time, right? Here's a now 21-year-old who's done something that maybe his parents didn't understand, like create the decentralized internet, by the way, just want to drive that home, in his basement in Canada, and has now developed this massive project into something that will forever change finance and interaction. And do you know why? I don't know if anyone knows this, but Vitalik Buterin made Ethereum because he was so pissed off because the founders of World of Warcraft changed his character and brought the powers down of his like orc. And he was so pissed off that a central authority ruined something that he loved that he was going to create a decentralized internet so that could never happen again. And again, maybe some of you are like, that's my kid, like rebelling against authority, coding something, creating a new project. And I will be willing to bet that at some point, Vitalik's parents or coaches or someone thought like he's got to get off the screens and do his algebra homework, right? Or something like that. So again, I say this just to say, let's try to let go some and realize that maybe our kids are meeting their needs in other places. If we can realize perhaps that our way of living is different from our kids and that times are changing, I think that that's a really important place to approach a state of open, detective-like curiosity. Okay. And I'd like to usher a little activity here. I want to give you a break. Most people can't pay attention for more than 20 minutes anyway. So why not lean into that and have some fun? Here's a quick question for you. I want you to take a couple minutes. It says 3, but we're going to do less. Last time I did this, it was for like a 90-minute webinar. So I want you to take 3 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes. I want you to reflect. How is your student? You can write on paper, you can write in the chat, you can write and never share with us, or you can not write at all and just think. How is your student or client, if you're a professional, currently socializing or meeting their social needs? And maybe how are they not? And I want you to go and be curious. Are they doing these things in places that you haven't otherwise looked? Think for a moment. I'll set a 2-minute timer to keep us honest. I want you to think for a moment and then we'll discuss. And if anyone feels uncomfortable, no need to share. If the timer bothers you, it's not for any reason other than just to keep us focused so we don't go over. If you don't like it, you can always just not look at it. And if you are a little bit confused, let me know before I start. But the goal right now is just for you to think, how is your child, your children, your clients, how are they maybe socializing? And maybe they're doing it in places that you haven't otherwise thought to look. How are they meeting their socializing needs? Whether you like it or love it or, well, the opposite. Does that make sense, everybody? Hopefully. I see someone already responded. Online D&D class, in-person D&D, and one-on-one play dates. Gaming with a friend, biking with a buddy, homeschooling, so it's a challenge. Okay, connecting with students in school to set things up outside of school, perhaps. Group chats, gaming, Discord. Okay. Parents set up play dates. I like this list a lot because there might be things on here that you don't necessarily love, but you realize like group chats and gaming and Discord, like these might be things that we maybe are like a little like, oh, it's too much screen time. But we're realizing also that they're meeting certain needs. Play dates at the park, recess. Okay. So yeah, actually, we're quite quick. I can stop my little timer here. What we might find is that a lot of the times that our kids are meeting their needs, they're just not always in the places that we thought to look or that we were hoping. And I'm going to segue into the third bit, but I just want to share a thought, which is like, depending on when and where you grew up, at one point you may very well have, ridden a banana seat bicycle to the center of a cul-de-sac and dropped your bike, and that's how you knew where everybody was, right? It was like you go to the so-and-so's house because all the bikes were out front or whatever. And I think for a lot of us, like we expect our kids to do that. And when they don't go outside and when they don't do the things, it's sort of hard for us, right? And I think that we're going to explain now a little bit better maybe why that might be. So this part 3 is about cutting to the core and looking at what some of the research tells us. As we said, avenues, for socializing are definitely shifting, and we should be cautious. Like there's addictive trends, and there's a lot of competition, and even the late Steve Jobs apparently didn't allow like technology at the dinner table. So it tells you when the higher ups are concerned about some of these things that we should be concerned. So I'm not saying any of this to dismiss that, but I think it's better to understand it, right? So, but the biology behind this whole thing tells us like the incentive salience model, especially those of us who have ADHD, if you have kiddos with ADHD or autism, we know that a lot of the times from a medical model perspective, we would say that they have lower dopamine levels and that they're pursuing dopamine stimulation, right, to keep them up. ADHD is often characterized by lack of focus and hyperfocus, right? So I'm having a hard time paying attention and then I almost cannot stop. And that is because of attention, interest, dopamine, chemicals, right? All these other elements that come together. And for a lot of us, we go where feels good. Again, for my note takers, I want you to write this down. We go where feels good. If your kiddo's having a hard time in a certain place, like school, like socializing the way that I mentioned before, by riding bikes or playing sports, but they're popular on Minecraft, or they're important on Discord, or they're a dungeon master, perhaps they're going to get more of the feel goods, right? Human beings are motivated by the 2 P's. We move towards pleasure and away from pain. We're quite simple. And if your kiddo is experiencing pleasure in some places and pain in others, it's easy to think, what's wrong and what's going on and why are they doing these things and why are they doing the things? And I would just ask you again to like be curious, maybe are they meeting like dopamine levels? Are they getting like crazy stimulation or maybe positive self-affect? They feel good because someone sees them as important in this place or as this avatar. So it's associative behavior. If I do this, I get this reward, right? And a lot of the times our ADHD brains are really looking for that. They're really looking for it. The aftermath is often either a return to the bottom or a desire to keep going, right? And so we see these behaviors where this is where things become more important. And parents, how can we use this knowledge? Reinforcement, right? If we see our kids doing things that feel really good and we can try to find praise in those. Hey, I noticed that you're like really important in Minecraft. Like, can I sit and like check out what's going on? Or I noticed you're getting a ton of shout outs and emails or whatever from, people on your Discord server. Like, did you set that up? Are you in charge there? Instead of just like, get off your computer, it's 6 p.m., right? So we're going in and we're curious and we're understanding what needs are they having met. Kind of going back to our broader topic, I want to return to this. This is a quote from one of my colleagues, Dr. Lin Lim Go. Humans are emotional creatures who think, not thinking creatures who emote. Right? I want to say that again. Humans are emotional creatures who think, not thinking creatures who emote. Why does this matter? Because we're using logic to try to explain emotions. And more specifically, if any of you have been to any executive function talk ever, what's the magic number they always remind you? Like, oh, this part of your brain and this, you know what I'm talking about? They'll say like, this part of your brain's done developing. Does anyone know the number if you want to guess? Oh, you're on mute. 25,
28.
28. So neurotypical people, again, brains are like thumbprints, right? There's no like neurotypical so much, but it's kind of like the data points, like the ones that converge toward the mean. We say neurotypical brains a lot of times are done developing around 25, 26, and neurodivergent brains between 27 and 30. So we're talking about this frontal part, which is in charge of thinking, memory, and behavior and movement. This is still developing, but you know what? This emotional part inside here, it develops a lot earlier. So we're going for pleasure. And a lot of the times we're saying like, you need to limit this and you need to do this before you do that. That's not how we work. Our brains develop back to front. We're emotional and then we're logical. It takes work. And so a lot of the times when we see our kids, like, why are they behaving certain ways and why are they doing certain things? It's important to understand, just a friendly reminder that the way in which our brains develop. And also, this is where all the executive function stuff happens, right? Like task initiation and resisting impulsivity and stuff like that. That's still developing. So a lot of times when we talk about socializing and we talk about connecting, we just need to be aware of like what we're asking. And I say this with love, but our expectations a lot of times are unrealistic. And it's important that we realize that, I think, and do some kind of deep work. I know I've already probably offended someone because someone left, but I'm sorry. But we're going to get into the actionable tips in just a moment. But I just say that because I think it's so, so important. And I hope that you find this incredibly liberating. I hope that you see this information and you say to yourself, oh, brilliant. Then I just need to change my expectations. Because at the core, right, we know that our young people, kids, clients, children, etc., are meeting their social emotional needs the best way they can. Someone asked a brilliant question. I'm going to get to that in a moment. At the core, many of our kids have low self-esteem. And I want to go back to that twice exceptional understanding. Why is that? Because they have these asynchronies. What does one do? We have a girl at Young Scholars Academy who's 12 years old. She has a 179 IQ. That's complex. To give you context, Albert Einstein was believed to be 165 to 175. She has a 179 IQ. Her friends might be going out and, trying different games and playing whatever, and she's like worried about the weight of climate change. Like, that's tough. You can't hang out with like 35-year-olds who are also worried about climate change. And you also can't hang out with 12-year-olds who are worried about goodness knows what. Because of this complex profile, we know our kids really need each other. But that complexity makes often for low self-esteem. And this is one of the big reasons that a lot of our kids do have these great asynchronies, is that, their high intelligence can make them aware of their abilities, but then they're frustrated around their difficulties. Like, I know this stuff. Why can't I just write it down? Or, I have this raw IQ score and people expect me to fill in the blank. Or maybe it's because of a difficulty in the past, because someone was bullied because they always knew the right answers, or they had a stutter, or they had a difficult time. But I just want to keep in mind that like these profiles have these great strengths and these struggles, and they bring this into, I told you before, our kids are always green. They bring this into socializing, they bring this into academics, they bring it everywhere. And so these asynchronies are complex. Because twice exceptional children seem to possess the characteristics of giftedness and learning differences, they often struggle with perceptions around their own strengths, right? And I want to share a quick study with you. This is in the 90s when this term was still coming into fruition. There was a bunch of young boys, there's researchers Vespi and Uchuk, and they interviewed a bunch of young boys, and they concluded that the children, as they grew, in areas around making friends in elementary and pre-elementary, they realized that all the young boys were frustrated with their peer interactions. Tell me if this sounds familiar. And 75% of them felt like they could relate better to adults. So when looking at a young group of high intelligence kids with learning differences, they were frustrated with peer-to-peer interactions and they felt like they could relate to adults. Why? Because adults can look past social differences and appeal to intellect. Adults have more patience, right? And so I share this with you because when it comes to socializing, our kids' diagnoses are really complex and really important, right? Even twice exceptional is like a really big term. A kid who's like autistic and highly verbal, it might present differently from a kid who's got like really high schoolhouse giftedness and dyslexia, right? We have different strengths and different challenges. And so even as a group coming together, the way our kids are diagnosed is going to affect the way in which they socialize and experience successes or struggles. Okay. And finally, before we pivot, the research here shows without any shadow of a doubt, this is a Nehart study in 2002, that groups of kids experience far more, and by the way, you're here for a conversation around connecting and socializing. Kids experience more belonging, more patience, more empathy, and more acceptance when they're with other neurodivergent kids. Okay, so again, my note takers, this is something I might want to make a note of. Our kids need one another. The research is abundantly clear that neurodivergent square pegs need to be with other neurodivergent square pegs. I showed you the example before of the 12-year-old drive at home. This is incredibly important. Our kids need safe spaces. They need to feel like they can express their unique interests, and they need others who can look past differences and struggles and also share in their excitement. We had a parent who wrote me an email. It's one of my favorite emails I ever had. She said, my son made his first friend in this class when he connected with another kid around the deepest, darkest black color. And they both seen the same YouTube video. And, this kid is 9. And this was his first friendship. And it was simply because he was just with someone else who had a similar interest, someone who could look past differences and see a really unique interest that no one else at 9-year-old has, or clearly one other person does, but maybe not many, right? And that's the point here. I think you all came for these reasons. You want your kids to have more acceptance, more belonging, more patience, more empathy, and more happiness. And you can have more of that when you connect your kids with other kids like that. So this brings us to the big moment. I want to ask one last question before we go to the big 10, the reason that you perhaps showed up this evening. I want to ask you to think for a moment. You can write this in the chat. We can unmute and discuss. This originally was part of a workshop, so just ignore this part. We're not going into breakout rooms. But I want to ask you this question, which is just, where does your child feel most safe and most accepted? Are they finding creative ways to increase the amount of time that they spend perhaps with other neurodivergent kids? Are they finding creative ways, maybe joining robotics or staying after in school or getting detention because they like the kids that hang out there, playing Minecraft? I mean, whatever it might be. Are kids looking for unique pathways? Are they finding unique pathways to perhaps increase the amount of time they spend with other neurodivergent people? Feel free to let us know in the chat. Feel free to discuss for a moment if you'd like. If you want to unmute, be curious, be a detective. Okay, feeling safest at home. Yeah, socializing is tough. It is really tough, especially when our kids have these great asynchronies. That's why homeschooling is such an attractive offer for so many people who have twice exceptional and neurodivergent kids. Anyone else? Where does your child feel safe and accepted? Where's a place where they're maybe finding creative ways to spend more time with people who get them? Might be on the internet. It might be connecting around games. It could be going to the library. Maybe they've done a college class. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of people struggling. And again, our kids don't change, right? The environment does. And that's a really important point, is that setting is everything. And so we want to equip them with the best one. All right. Well, thank you to those of you who responded. Let's get to the reason you came here tonight. Finally, let's get to the tips. So I've got 10 tips for you. Again, please don't feel like you need to rush to write these down. I've made a resource for you at the end that you can just, well, it's got all of them on one page. But if writing notes helps you, then don't let me hold you back. Number one, the best place to start is at the center. Involve your kiddo. Okay. A lot of times we think we need to like make these big decisions and grandiose commitments for them. And that's not always the case. Maybe supporting your kiddo in the process and asking them, like, what are some things that you're interested in doing? I know you talk a lot about like YouTube and Mr. Beast and, is becoming like a content creator something that's important? Where do content creators hang out? What kinds of things are they doing? What, and maybe figuring out opportunities for them. Maybe there's a course on, how to be a YouTuber or whatever it might be, but get your kiddo involved in the process and ask, what are they hoping to do? What are they interested in? What's firing them up right now, no matter how old they are? It doesn't have to be like, what do you want to do when you grow up kind of a thing, but what's exciting you right now? And then another question is this: what role does socializing play in that vision? What may opportunity there be for people to connect around that space? Maybe with older mentors, maybe with similarly aged peers. Okay, so number one is get them involved. We want to get that buy-in, and honestly, they might have better ideas than us, or at least brilliant insight that can help us out a lot. And like a lot of times, we feel like we need to like solve things for our kids rather than involve our kids. Number two, we need to be introspective before socializing, right? We need to remember that at the core, there's deeply held beliefs. There might be trauma, those different things that we talked about before. So, we don't want to then just say, okay, well, when you're going to socialize more, we're going to go back to that loud party that really bothered you. And because kids go to parties at your age, and that's normal, right? We want to check ourselves and see, are we just like putting our kids into a harmful environment? Remember the classic saying, I believe Ned Hallowell said this. Can't remember if it's Hallowell or Green. I always mix people up. But, our kids do well when they can, right? Our kids do well when they can. They want the things that you want, and thrusting them back into something that didn't work before may not help. So we want to reflect a bit and maybe encourage our kids. Like, what's been the best time that you feel like you've been super connected to other people? What have been some times that have been difficult and we want to avoid, right? How can we get more of that good and less of that bad? We want to use positive psychology here and get some early wins. And this leads to the next one, which is really playing to their strengths. Can we play to their strengths? This is a strength-based conversation. Young Scholars Academy, we're a strength-based enrichment center. I feel that most of the world has a deficit-based focus trying to bring the bottom up, but most things in life are much more rewarding when we raise the roof, right? What are their strengths? No one cares about Picasso's ability to do anything else but paint, or Einstein's ability to do complex math. Why are we so focused on having our kids be good at everything? Why don't we just figure out what they're strong with, right? What are they interested in? And how can we get them doing more of it? Especially neurodivergent people. I live in Los Angeles. I know you're all up in the Bay Area. Most of my friends are super quirky, autistic, twice exceptional creatives who work in the industry. And you know what? If you're really good, people look past all your quirks because you're really freaking smart and talented. And so if we can just get our kids socializing in areas where they're more interested and they feel strong, then they're going to have that positive affect and they're going to feel much better and probably elevate to a sense of self-importance. Number 4, some of you said play dates and things. Good. Don't be afraid to curate. I think a lot of us feel like we have to be totally hands-off. And I think, look, our goal is a gradual release of responsibility. You want your kids to fly the nest, but don't compare it to neurotypical families. Our kids are going to need more scaffolding and support. They might really want to do something and not have the executive function abilities to do it. So we might need to curate a bit, but try to be as curious as possible. Can we listen and before we instruct? Can we see if there's opportunities or things that they're interested in or they're aligned with their visions? A lot of the times our twice exceptional kids are really most comfortable in curated environments, right? We were talking about D&D earlier. There's a role, like I have responsibilities. This is not a like go to Bobby's birthday and then you'll pick me up in 3 hours. Like I'm an orc. Okay. I've got like orc responsibilities. Okay. Or, in this class debate, like I'm the moderator. There's clear roles around this. So curation can happen in a number of ways. It doesn't necessarily need to be like just a play date. It can be something with rules. Sometimes people feel really safe with rules. Sometimes they're confining and you need to know your kids, but being flexible and giving them agency and then being able to maybe set things up and help them. Someone said it's hard to find other kids in person, like my kiddo. And that, I mean, I'm biased. I created a virtual enrichment program. But yes, I mean, it is tough. And especially when your kids are much younger. I think that places like, community colleges and colleges can be a fantastic place for finding older people who might help your kiddo, like a mentor and so forth. But finding similarly aged kids who are neurodivergent to become friends with in your zip code is limiting. I mean, it's just the reality. It's a numbers game. Depending on where you live, it's tough. But joining parent groups like this one is a fantastic way to start. Number four, excuse me, five is depending on, I say qualifier, depending on how old your kids are, being a bit vulnerable, right? Sharing a little bit. I had a hard time. Socializing was tough. It's really scary. I remember the first time grandpa dropped me off, whatever. And talking about things that have been maybe scary for you, maybe some strategies that helped you. A lot of the times, I think as parents, we want to like help our kids rise to the occasion. And sharing difficulties for you can be really helpful because they might find that A, they can trust you more and they feel safe telling you things, and B, you might actually have some great wisdom. So just kind of opening up and helping our students realize that like they're maybe judging themselves and that maybe you've done that before, maybe what's worked with you. And even I have this last line in here, helping our kids understand like why things like bullying happens. I remember studying psychology and realizing like I was getting my degree and I was like, oh my goodness, it's like generational trauma. Like someone's picked on and then they pass on the hurt and, helping kids understand like, hey, when someone might be mean, it might have nothing to do with you. They might just have like a hot potato they're throwing at you. And so that vulnerability can happen like you to them, but it can also happen like laterally, right? They might see someone who's like an adversary and be like, this person might be really going through it right now. And that vulnerability can kind of open. I'm not saying like, diminishing what they're going through or what you're going through or what you've been through, but just simply saying that vulnerability can spread and it can be supportive and it can really help make waves. Number six, I'm a big believer in this, especially for folks who feel like your kids are really bothered in settings that are maybe unpredictable. Have your kid as behind the wheel as possible. Having students work to really envision, like looking future pacing, what's it going to look like? What's it going to feel like? Can we visit the place where we're going to socialize and go on a play date before? Can we control certain factors? Right? Maybe it's like they always start at our house because our house is comfortable. Or we start on Zoom because at least everything else in my room is staying the same. The only thing that changes are the people on the screen. So if we can give as much control as possible, I think that this can help, especially our kids who maybe feel a little bit more fear and would benefit from a little bit more control to feel safe. And future pacing, like picturing how things work in the future is incredibly helpful. That's like the number one executive function tip in the world, right? Like instead of just saying like, hey, here's a checklist on packing your backpack, it's like, fast forward in the time machine to tomorrow morning, like what does that look like? What do you need to have at the door? Being kind of curious from an executive function standpoint, we can do it with socializing too. What's a perfect date look like with your friends, and getting them to really picture it and envision it and figure out how can we get as close to that as possible, and also say it might be not exactly that. And what do we do in that situation? There's a lot of different ways to look at this, but I think that at the end of the day, it's like super important that we're giving our kids space and control, but also building in some flexibility and support for when kids do need to be picked up or when things don't work out as well, etc. Number seven, I'm a big believer in this. This is like one of my favorite. I'm going to give you some like really concrete tips now. I'm a big believer in the friction rule, and I tell my kids this when they go off to college. If you can reduce friction and increase friction in certain areas, it's key to more or less of what you're looking for. So let's say, for example, I want to socialize more and I love to read. Right? Like, can I put a little bit more friction between what I usually do, which is pop a book open in my bed? Can I go to like Starbucks and just read there? Because I've increased the amount of work it's going to take. I've increased friction. Like this is a little bit harder for me, but I've decreased friction to my goal to socialize. Right? Like opening like a Philip K. Dick book, someone might come up to me and be like, I love Philip Dick, right? And I've decreased how hard it's going to be for someone else to get to know me, even though I've had to put in a little bit more work up front. Does that make sense? It works for everything in life. You want to not use your phone so much? Throw it across the room. Okay. It sounds simple, but like if you can't just reach for it, you can't be as impulsive, right? More friction. You want to eat healthier? Throw away the junk food, right? There's less bad stuff in your house. It's the same for socializing. Can we make it so that we can kind of like reverse engineer certain things that we want our kids to do so that we can have opportunities that make things a little bit easier for them? Again, read sci-fi, do it in a cozy bookstore. Okay, coming to the end here. I know it's late at night. I appreciate you. You're all amazing. I've got a gift for you soon. Number 8 is a couple socializing tips. I told you I'd give you some actionable stuff I want you to leave. I hate when I go to a talk and I'm like, that was thought-provoking, and it stops there. I want to give you some real stuff that you can use like yesterday. So one of the big ones I like to help kids understand is not to talk at people, but to be next to them. And what I mean by that is using your surroundings, right? If you and I are together and we're watching a movie, we can sort of lean over and talk about the movie rather than like, what's your favorite meal, right? These are really awkward conversations that usually our kids don't care as much about. If we have a shared experience, we're looking at a painting together, we now have a stimuli that connects us. We instantly have something that we're doing, right? You and I could all talk about how horrible this presentation was after and how I went on and on, right? You had a shared experience with me, and you can say, oh my goodness, that guy just kept speaking and speaking, and you're bonded, you're together, you're connected, you have an instant bond. And so I think if we can equip our kids to do that, that's really important. For your incredibly rigid kids who love rules and regulations and want to feel like a better way to understand when they talk too much or don't talk enough, I use the 3-to-1 rule a lot. Sometimes it's called IFR as well. The 3-to-1 rule is basically like connecting questions and interests. So I might ask someone 3 questions and then share something. Interesting. Tell me more about that. How did you get started on that? That actually reminds me of this. And then you start again. It's also called IFR, which is inquire, follow up with an inquiry, and then relate. So I could say, Jane, I have a question. How long have you been using Zoom? And then Jane could answer, and I could say, interesting. You're actually one of the first Zoom users. What made you use Zoom before everybody else? And then you tell me, and then I was relate. I actually started using Zoom kind of reluctantly, but I gravitated right to it, and I can't stand Google Meets or whatever it's called, right? So all of a sudden, yeah, we're the same. And so all of a sudden, it's like IFR, right? Inquire, follow up, relate, and there's kind of like a ratio there. Some kids find comfort in that. Another great one. I have my seniors read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. If you've never read it, it's a fantastic book, 1937. It's, of course, outdated in some ways, but the book was a hand guide for salespeople in the Great Depression to get jobs. And the book is brilliant, and many of the takeaways are focus on other people, right? If you can ask and express genuine interest in other people, then people will actually quite like you because we like to talk about ourselves. And it's put so simply, it says the greatest sound in the English language is someone's name. Right. So me telling Denise, I'm really interested in getting to know you, Denise. And I noticed, Denise, that when you were talking, Denise, right, salespeople do this all the time. And you feel like, oh, he knows me, right? This is all from this book. I think if we can help our kids, especially our really bright kids who want like complex reading, it's a fantastic read. And it's like 100 years old. So it's a primary document. Why the heck not? Number 9, coming to the end here, leadership. Can we find opportunities where our kids are either already doing cool stuff and we can point it out, or find opportunities where they can, even if you don't think it's super important? Again, being in charge of a Discord, big deal, right? Being in charge of a dungeon master role, that's a big deal. Maybe you didn't know that before. You just thought your kid played D&D. Can we be curious? Can we find opportunities for them to lead something? Or maybe, even though you think your kid might be falling apart and really struggling, can they mentor younger kids? Can we give them an opportunity to do something that like really elevates their status and makes them feel super good, right? So finding places where our kids can rise to the top, where they can feel really darn good about themselves, is going to lead to them wanting more and subsequently believing in the role, realizing that they're incredible and seeing all the great strengths that you already do. And then number 10, last but not least, I think the importance of mentoring, right? We go back in psychology and we look at like Albert Bandura and a lot of the earlier researching, it's that seeing is so important. And the most frustrating thing about being a parent is that you can say it until you're blue in the face and your kids won't always listen. But having another older person who's not you, sorry, can say these things, maybe an adult or a college kid or, a mentor in a religious institution or something, Boy Scouts or whatever it might be. This relationship can lead to a lot of encouragement and hope. And I'm a firm believer that when our kids are together with, like, I call this the X and the Y axis of success. When our kids are together, the X axis with like-minded kids, they thrive. When they're together with like-minded adults, they thrive even more because they can look up and over and realize that there are kids just like them who grow up and become adults and are just fine. So I know this was a heck of a lot. I want to recap the 4 things we did, and then I've got a little something I told you I would share with you. Number 1, we talked about who two twice exceptional kiddos are. 2, we talked about this kind of socializing shift, understanding that like times are a-changing, right? And that even though we have an idea what socializing might look like, we might challenge ourselves to perhaps let it go a little bit, let the leash out a little bit. Number 3, we sort of cut to the core and looked at this idea of sort of, our kids' brains and the way they develop back to front, and the reality that the emotional part of our brain is so much stronger and louder, and that our logical part is not as developed, even as adults, let's face it, as those emotions. And then finally, number 4, we looked at these 10 different solutions. And I'd like to share that with you now. I'm going to just put this in the chat. I have this little like page here. You can put your email in and your name, and you'll get this emailed to you, all the things that we talked about tonight. And let me put that in the chat right now. And also, I want to invite you all, before we go to questions, I promised I would answer questions. I want to invite you all. Our little virtual village tomorrow night has an open house. So we offer virtual enrichment courses for twice exceptional and neurodivergent kiddos. And we have about 233 families and 15 different teachers. And our whole model is offering strength-based courses. We just opened for enrollment today, and our open house is tomorrow. So you can get kind of an idea of the types of things that we offer. We have courses like game theory and philosophy. And again, the whole idea is helping our kids come together and connect with like-minded peers in learning stuff that they usually can't find anywhere else virtually in small group settings. So we have Magic the Gathering. Every family who signs up gets a homeroom social club when you enroll in 2 classes. It's like you would have a homeroom at a brick and mortar. We have AI and automotive engineering where the kids are building actual model engines at home, or robotics, or they're coding. Math for life, calculating things that our kids would do on their free time. We have novel writing classes and tools of war, World War I, World War II history. We have anime and a movie club and songwriting and theater and improv. So we have over 35 different classes, and we're doing a live open house. Sorry, we're doing a live open house tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific time, where you can come and meet all of our teachers. And thank you for the love, Robin, where you can come meet all the teachers. Everybody goes into different breakout rooms. It's 1 hour and it's not recorded. So I definitely would encourage you to come check that out if you're keen. That's tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific. And if you get the email for the resource that I shared with you here, I'll email you tomorrow about the open house as well. So you get kind of a 2-for-1 there. But I can also put this in the chat as well. And I would like to stop and thank you for listening to me and answer your questions, and appreciate you for hanging out on a late Tuesday night. So please, I know there were some questions I didn't get to. I'm happy to answer those, or if we want to start with any other ones.
Yeah, do you want to go back and answer?
Yeah, there was one I skipped earlier because it was a little bit longer, and then there was
Yes.
another one I just skipped at the end. So I'm happy to do those.
How do you change a school's expectations?
This is a big one. I think that, and that's why I saved it. Changing it anytime we make waves and try to, topple something that's quite bigger, a system, a school, it's incredibly challenging. And I think the best way to do that is to start by planting seeds. What's our primary concern? Is it that the school is seeing our kids' deficits and not their strengths? Is it that maybe they're punishing our kid by not letting them do the electives that are important to them because they're struggling in their main classes? It really depends. It's case dependent. But I think the number one tip that I can give you is that regardless of the situation, if we can find opportunities to just highlight and project our kids' strengths to the school so they can see. Look, I know that you might be seeing them struggle and fall apart in class, but I got to tell you, when you put this kid in front of blank, they thrive, right? Or I know that they're struggling right now in your English class because you're asking for a lot of writing. I'm just curious, do they have to do the writing, or are you just looking for them to show that they understand the book? Because if that's the case, they actually have a podcast. I don't know if you know, right? Or something like that, right? So can we like holistically project our kids' like strengths and interests and passions so that they can see. And my recommendation is start with the teachers. It's grassroots. You might not change the admin. Try to get the teachers to help. Make a little change. They're really busy. Can you give them quick bullet points? Don't write huge novels, please. Can you give them quick bullet points to just help them? Here's my kid's strength. Here's what he loves. Here's when he's at his best. And little things like that that can just kind of bring your kid's strengths to the forefront. I think that's a massive one. And again, it's context dependent. So I'm sorry if I dance around your question. Please, if you want to ask more, please unmute or put more in the chat, and I'm happy to answer. But I think the number one thing is projecting those strengths. There's another question that came up, and again, I love conversation. So this is not meant to be a sit and get. Please, everybody, unmute and discuss. It says, where do you find a mentor for your child, and how do you know it's an adult that you can trust? I mean, that's $1 million question, I think. My recommendation, obviously, I'm biased. Like, come check out Young Scholars Academy. But outside of us, I think that finding experts in fields, like again, I think of the automotive class that we have. Like, if you have a kiddo who you know is incredibly interested in automotive work, can you find like a quirky mechanic who's going to be open to them like coming by and picking their brains? And maybe you stick around just because you don't really know the person. Or I think one of the best ways to do it is to think like, where are people already background checked? Like, I think about that a lot. I'm like, where is it already safe? Like, people in libraries or like universities, like, are there professors or like graduate level students who are kind of like nearing the end of their academic experience and they want to kind of go and help younger people out and so forth. So I always try to think of like, who's safe, and then go there. But if there's something that's really unique that your kid has a really niche interest, then just be involved in it. Just like hang out and see if you can find something. Old folks at homes are great places too. Like, people, they have more time in their hands and they're usually really established, but they're seen as kind of like an old person, or they don't really get the limelight like they used to when they were maybe a professional. So that's another great recommendation too. Um, I think
Yeah,
someone unmuted.
sorry, it's me.
No, no, go.
I think that a lot of times, like, I'll get my neighbors, like they'll come ask me for help on something, and then they'll try to pique the kids' interest. And then that's how I get a lot of, like, just the other day, my neighbor came over, I worked on Etsy with her, and then she took my daughter and they made like a cute little card for school. And she loved it. It was like one-on-one attention. It was amazing. But I had a question. Um, so when they're young and they have these deficits that they're working on, so like for instance, my kids have dyslexia and it takes a lot of time and effort, and I foundationally think that they should know how to read. They don't have to read amazingly, but they just, be able to scan a page, go to the grocery store and find pancake mix, like whatever it is. So and then so skill building versus interest. Like at school, their interests, it's not reading or math or whatever it is, and they just have to do these things. So I guess, how do you find that balance? And then when does it change? Like, when do things get better? Like for you, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think a good question is always why. Like, why are we doing this? I think you brought that up, which is, like, why math? Oh, why math? It's so tough. It's like, wait, is there something bigger that we're a part of? Are we doing something that's bigger? I feel like, for example, what you said is really smart. Like, yes, everybody needs to learn how to read. You might have to learn different strategies and different scaffolds, but we should learn how to read. It's kind of a non-negotiable. We should have the ability to create task management systems. We should be able to create things that help us do things we want to do and things that we don't. Right? We should have the ability to capture ideas. There are certain skills, and the way that I frame it is that, and you've already actually answered your own question in my mind, which is, if we can frame things as not like, this is not the end, this is not the goal, this is a stepping stone so you can do what you want even if you can't see it right now, and we can get them to future pace as much as possible. Sure, you might not need to learn like trigonometry, but is there a world in which, like, I know you really want to be a YouTuber, like, how might you figure out like the finances and the algorithm? And I'm just curious, like, how do you think the big names in the field figure out like what videos work and what titles to click? And if making it as relevant as close as possible, getting them to look as far out of it as they can, as far as they can see, and then be able to connect the things and kind of like reverse engineer for them, because they won't be able to do that yet. That's like a really mature prefrontal cortex skill. So walking backward from that. But like when it gets like better, so to speak, it's just a waiting game. I hate to say that. It's so unsatisfying. But the things that people are asking your kids to do are not realistic for their neurological and cognitive developments. And so if we just like keep pushing and keep trying, a lot of times they just like kind of shut down. I agree. Again, if you're dyslexic, we want to learn different interventions. And the research is really clear, like do that early, right? Because they're like really fatigued. They're using whole parts of their brains that aren't even used for language processing that are tiring them out. And that if they can use certain, neural connections, they'll have a way easier time of it. And then they'll exponentially learn more over a lifetime. So it's like, what do you do? That's a lot of pressure. At the same time, I keep going back. Humans are social creatures first. If your kids are doing things that are meaningful, that fill them up, that make them feel good, that are stimulating their brain, the reading, the task management, the executive function stuff, it will come. It just does. Many of our kids don't really click until college or after, just because all of a sudden the expectations and things change. It's not like they magically change. They're growing up and they're developing, but also all of a sudden it's like you don't have to do everything because you can just focus on the one thing that you really care about. Like a lot of our kids actually thrive in the later years of college because it's just singular focus, right? And so it's just, I hate to say it, but it's like try to wait, try to encourage as many opportunities for success, as many opportunities for interest in other kids, and always zoom out and ask, why are we doing this? If you're being asked to have your kid and you're just having these like horrible fights at home around X, Y, and Z, what's the point? Like, why are we doing this? Is there another way? What's the end goal? Be curious yourself and be a critical consumer. Your kids are no doubt being really critical consumers of why they're being asked to do things. I think we can do the same.
Yeah. I think Robin has a question.
Yes. And then we got one in the chat too.
Yeah. And Denise. Yeah, the younger kids. You know what? At Square Peg, we should all get our, try to match make some kids. That was kind of one of the things I wanted to do. We don't have, I think teenagers as high as it goes at the moment. So
And that's great. I don't know if Robin wanted to ask one, but I can answer the chat. And then if anyone wants to unmute, please feel free. Yeah, Robin, do you want to ask one?
Oh, well, I just put it in the chat, and this might be too philosophical, but because I've been watching a lot of TV that's from, hundreds of years ago, and you think of like people only lived to be 30 or 40 or like 50 was old. And so when we find out that like our prefrontal cortex, like we're not fully developed until we're 25 or maybe the late 20s, it baffles me that we had kings that were 15 and that our life was like over by the time we were like 30. But that's just when the brain develops. So I just kept and of course, when I was younger, I was not curious about this at all. I just wanted to be able to solve problems. But now that I don't have to perform for anybody when I think about these things, it's just really curious to me because we're humans that are built for a long time. And I just wonder about these things, about what.
I think there's something in there that you just said.
Do you know
I want
what I
to
mean?
highlight. Yeah, I totally do. And I can give you a quick answer to that. But I want to say something that connects to what Mina said, which is you just said like I didn't want to do it until like no one asked me to, basically, right? Like that's the whole point. It's like our
Yes.
kids are like that too. It's like you're not interested in something until it's on your own terms, right? And I think if I were to like sum this up in someone else's words tonight, like that's the point of the talk. Can you help your kids socialize like around their own terms? Can you help them do things that are interesting to them because they're too smart for like anything else? Something else you said about like the sort of the timeline, and it's kind of scary to think that we have had like 9-year-old emperors and whatnot. These are like feudal societies, right? So people don't need their prefrontal cortexes to just like dig a ditch, right? And so a lot of the times we live now in you could make an argument that this is like either an intellectual era or like a quandary era and like the artificial intelligence symbiotic world that we live in. But for the most part, people didn't really need much more because well, there were enlightened philosophers and thinkers and readers and artists and all these things. Most people were, in feudal societies, they were like doing, manual things and not much else. Now, as we live in an era where we're in an intellectual era, I think there's much more cognitive demand on us. and that changes a great deal.
I
But these are really
totally
good points.
Yeah, so I was going to say something too about this is that I think, like Sam was saying, we are in an intellectual era, so we have to process so much more information than ever before in any amount of like any time. And then back then, life was a slower pace, right? Like you go hang out at school and then you go home and your neighbor would be working on his car and you go hang out with him and then maybe you'd become a mechanic or something. Like now everyone just goes to school, they're racing around doing their after school activities. They go to college and then they get there and they're like, I don't know what to do with my life because they haven't been exposed to some of those deep interests. And so that's why I really appreciate Young Scholars Academy because they, like my kids aren't getting what they need at school in terms of interest and sparks and all those things. And so that's why like I'm always looking for other things outside, like whatever it is. I don't care if it's D&D, I don't care if it's whatever. Like it's like stepping stones, and then I try to find other kids or sometimes we like at Archer School, basically I bought a whole set of D&D books and they all went insane for the D&D. And so that's all they could talk about for 6 months or however long we are into this school year.
I'm going to answer. There's a bunch of questions coming in. I want to answer some of these other ones here. We talked about TV addiction. It's hard to regulate, and bad role model, humor for adults. More poor behavior and lack of self-regulation. Yeah, I always like to just say, like, not all television, not all technology, not all screen time's created equal, right? And there's a lot of bad, and there's a lot of good, and there's a lot of gray. I think it's really important to disseminate. Our kids are sometimes doing the equivalent of a graduate level course in YouTube, and they're sometimes playing a digital slot machine. And I think that we just need to be curious and we need to be, ears, and we need to understand what's happening when and why. Is this a dopamine pursuit thing that's unhealthy? That's the equivalent of just getting that fix, pulling that lever, hoping you get cherry, 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 and we're seeing, staying up real late and a lot of these things. Are there maybe routines and things that we can put in place where we're compromising? Hey, look, I feel like the TV is it's a little bit mud. I'm not saying that TV is bad, but maybe could we like organize like what's okay in order, like from good to like questionable, and maybe involve your kid in the process a bit. And we're down for family TV, we're down for your TV. It's just that like some of the stuff I'm a little bit worried about, and it's my job to protect you and involving them in the conversation.
It's tough though, because they make, like I actually sit down and like watch a lot of this stuff with them. I know a lot of my husband, for instance, is just on his phone, not paying attention to the content. But even seemingly innocent kid focused shows that are rated G have villains, evil, like it's very black and white, evil versus good. No, you're either a totally bad person or a totally good person, which isn't real life. But it maybe part of my hang up is that I don't know if my son, my 8-year-old, is 2E. He's very, very verbal and always has been. He spoke really early, but like I think there are cognitive gaps, and I don't know if there's an exceptional thing there yet, but I think that a lot of this content on TV is so addictive and it's so entertaining the way they make like the evil characters and whatever, but also I feel like it confuses young minds as to what's appropriate in real life versus not appropriate, because they make everything seem normal. Someone gets punched in the face, they pop back up like nothing happened, like it's no big deal. Or they talk about like, I'm gonna burn that, like they just, everything is so extreme, but then there's no consequence, you know? So I don't know, it just normalizes all this bad behavior. And I feel like it blurs the line between what's only supposed to be on TV as entertainment versus what is acceptable in real life and what can you do in real life. And so it negatively affects their behavior.
I'm a big believer in sort of inquisitive understanding, so can you explain this show to me, kind of playing coy a bit? So I'm not really, what's going on this guy's always bad and he always does bad things, and then the other guy always
Mhm.
like what's going on, and just trying to understand, and so this, like, he's always hurting people, and you get them, well, he doesn't always
Mhm.
hurt people, but you're like, I don't know if I like that. He's Do you know anyone that always hurts people? And just kind of going through with genuine curiosity, but kind of modeling this. And I always do this with like a really like, I'm just trying to, I want to be like really curious, like I'm kind of modeling this inquisitiveness, and they're leading questions, right? But we're
Mhm.
trying to get them to arrive that like this is not maybe good, and is everything that you watch like this? Then they're going to respond to some other no, I watch Bluey, or whatever it might be. Well, let's watch that because I want to see how that's different. And now all of a sudden they've made a decision to watch Bluey, right? And these are extreme examples, by the way. I love Bluey personally, but just making that kind of shift, and then so they're not always the same. I just don't know that I love that first one, and you're involving them in the process. You're not totally shutting it down, so they're going to just watch it at like a friend's house, right? Call
Mhm.
that like the soda rule. Like it's good to have soda in the house so your kids aren't like never exposed to it. And then they go to friends' houses and they're like binge drinking soda. But you also
Mhm.
want to make sure that there's like rules and regulations around it, right? And I think the same is true with TV. And I think one of the best approaches, this is not a silver bullet, there are none, but just being inquisitive, being curious, and figuring out, why they're attracted to it, and what else is going on.
Mhm.
I think I think it
Yeah.
also like depends too, like how like impressionable like a kid you have. Like some
Mhm.
kids like things just like roll off their back and it
Mhm.
doesn't, impact them. Like they can watch scary things, it doesn't bother them. They can watch bad things happening and they don't like internalize it. And then there are other kids that they see like the slightest bit of like conflict, it impacts them deeply. They play act it out to bad effect. And like
Mhm.
if you like just whatever kind of kid you have kind of influences what you can let them watch, if anything at all.
Well, also,
Yeah.
that's why I'm like, I don't really know about my 8-year-old because he is on the spectrum, and I don't know if there's that, you know, some people on the spectrum see things more in black and white, and they don't understand or they don't really think of people as being so complex. Like you can be bad and you can be good. You can be a really good person, but make a few mistakes and then be labeled as bad, but you're not really a bad person at heart. Like I try to explain those things. Like no one in the world is bad. No one's born bad. They just had trauma as a child, or they were mistreated, or they were bullied, and it's coming out as anger and violence, but really they're just sad inside. Like all these, I try to like paint this picture, but it doesn't seem to stick,
Yeah.
you know?
I think what SG is saying is a really good point, which is that a lot of our kids feel really big feelings. Others might learn feelings from TV. I had a student who I taught for like 10 years, and he like learned like how to emote from like The Simpsons. And it's like you see this from afar and you're like, this is terrible. But he would relate real life situations to Simpsons episodes, and it would help him
Mhm.
make sense. And it was fascinating. It really challenged me as a mentor. Like, what? You're learning like deep lessons about like, human behavior from the satire. I think
Mhm.
it is complex. Once you've met one twice exceptional kid, or one, autistic kid, you've met one autistic kid. It is such a case by case situation. I think approaching everything with curiosity is fantastic. And then also, like another example of something that we do, we have a storytelling course, narrative design and storytelling, and our kids go through like they understand the hero's journey. So maybe the role of the bad guy is not just because they do bad, but it's because they like define the good person, right? Like their existence in contrast to the enemy.
Mhm.
It's part of the hero, like being guided by the mentor, and then we put this kind of intellectual lens on top of it, right? So there's so many ways we can pre-frame, but I think just approaching from a place of curiosity and wanting to understand is you're going to have more openness from your child. You're going to close them off less, and you're going to probably learn more. What you
Mhm.
do with that information is complex, but I think it's a good place to start.
Mhm. Makes sense.
I hope that helps. Other people are turning cameras on. Do we have other questions? I see some in the chat. What do I think of social skills classes? I don't like any deficit-based stuff. Like I think the impetus of a social skills class, like your kid already took the best social skills class that I know of, which is Dungeons and Dragons. Like you want to do something, you're part of a quest, there's a journey, this is urgent, it feels important, but hold on, it's someone else's turn. right? Like that's different from like, oh, you don't socialize the right way and you need to learn these skills. That's very much a like fix it model, right? So I believe the best kind of social skills are relevant skills to what I want to do. I want to play Minecraft. I want to play D&D, and I can learn tips and tricks along the way. I'm not saying, by the way, I used to have a class that helped. It was a strength-based social skills class. So I'm not wholeheartedly dismissing social skills classes. I'm just saying a lot of the times the feeling is like, let's learn something from a deficit-based angle because I struggle. Right? I think that doing something that feels relevant is more meaningful a lot of the times. I may have missed a sea of questions. So people, if you want to just unmute and ask out loud. Identifying strengths, that's a great question. There are a lot of great programs out there, of course, like working with strength-based neuropsychs, if your kid's doing like a neuropsych assessment. I know Bridges, like education conglomerate, I don't know what they're calling, Bridges group, education group. They have a strength-based assessment now that they do from the work of Dr. Susan Baum. And it's like an indicator that you do with a professional where you go through and you assess strengths and interests and learning preferences. That's like not a full neuropsych, so it's more affordable. That's a fantastic one. But again, being curious, paying attention, what are your kids interested in? Exposing them. I mean, my whole worldview is like we should expose our kids to a lot early because they have big brains that crave it, and then not force them to stick with anything and see what stays. Right? They might what I mean, at least in my experience in life, is that it's like a diagram, a Venn diagram, right? What I did is the intersection of everything else I was interested in. And so I think exposing our kids to a lot of different things and helping them find the connections and the pathways and the sort of mesh in between those is probably where they're going to meet people they're interested in and find
Can you
happiness and
give me,
fulfillment.
sorry, can you give me a list of curated experiences? Like my son loves rule-based activity, so like D&D class. Can you think of anything else?
I mean, it depends on how long of a commit. Like
Whole life.
escape rooms, whole life. I think like engineering, like I think of like goal-oriented projects, right? Like robotics is a good one where kids are like working towards something. Speech and debate, you have a defined role on a team, and there's certain, I'm the questioner, I cross-examine, and I'm the lead strategist, and I do all the research. Having, Model UN, any of these organizations where kids meet together and they have like defined roles, board game clubs and associations at different like game places. That's always a good one as well. We like when people ask me to describe like Young Scholars Academy, I'm like, we're just like a social club with intellectual stimulation in niche fields. It's really about bringing neurodivergent kids together around like things that they're interested in. It's not about playing Minecraft. It's about meeting people who play Minecraft, right? And building relationships around a similar love. So thanks, SG. Thank you for hanging out. Anyone else? Questions, if you have them, please let me know. I do have a hard stop. I got to go at like 8:30, if that's okay.
Okay. I have one last question. What would you suggest for Square Peg? Like, since we're a group, we're about 200. What kinds of things? Do you think we should like matchmake kids? Should we do you have any, I don't know, how do we help
I'll
kids
tell you this, like,
together?
so we're kind of in a space of one. I know so many other people who have tried to orchestrate and do the thing. It's really tough. Like, it's really tough to say, okay, we're gonna have 8 to 12-year-olds play D&D on Wednesday at 5. 200 families, maybe you get a tremendous turnout, but I would see if you can find a way to like survey like what are the age groups, what are the interest areas, and what are the like availabilities, I guess, and then figure out like maybe like a small pilot, because it's really tough to get a lot of people together. Everyone's like, you run a virtual enrichment school and you bring like 8 kids together at a time and you do these classes. Like I tried that. It's really tough to get people together, and people will say like, "Oh, that works perfectly," and then they're really busy and life happens or whatever. So
Well, most
I
of
would
these,
say,
I just want them to find their like one person, like you
yeah,
just
no,
it's
totally. But
easy,
I would
right?
say like start with a success.
Uh-huh.
Like survey your list and figure out like who are uh, the most of a avatar of a kid, interests, age, availability. Start there and see if you can create something that's successful, and then duplicate that and move out to different age groups, different interests, and so forth. But like start with the many.
I know, I'm trying to match make my kids with so many kids, and it's just like, it's like dating.
Super tough.
Yeah, it's really tough.
Yeah, Robin. Oh, you're muted, Robin.
Oh, there we go. I don't know if please pass if this is too personal. What would you, knowing what you know about yourself now and being an adult and running your life and knowing your strengths, what would you have changed about your school experience growing up, if you could? Or what tweaks would you make?
I mean, like what I've done is essentially try to build it. And that's Young Scholars Academy. I think I opened with that in the beginning, which is like I wanted to create what I was looking for. And I spent a lot of my life feeling really stupid. I like had this, I was never diagnosed for dyslexia, but my dad had dyslexia, and it's pretty obvious I do too. I was diagnosed with ADHD really young, and I had like all these skills that didn't really seem to matter so much in school. I could like get people to listen to me and to follow me, and I could make friends, and I was always like leading things, but like I couldn't pay attention, I couldn't read, and I had a hard time writing. And so you internalize that. And so my whole goal is to like save kids' lives by helping them tap their strengths early and build like positive self-affect about that early, so that you don't spend your whole life trying to fix. I just did like a TEDx talk, and I used the Superman analogy, saying, Superman doesn't spend his whole life trying to get over kryptonite allergy, right? Like he does a bunch of super stuff, and then he just happens to have an allergy to kryptonite, right? But I think a lot of the times we spend our whole lives trying to get over the one thing that's wrong with us, and we don't pay attention to the 99 things that are right with us. And so I think that education is really needing to focus on strengths and interests. Because again, nobody cares about Einstein's ability to do anything else but complex math and science, or Picasso's ability to do anything else but beautiful painting. So building our kids' interests, exploring a bunch of different opportunities early, and then helping them delve into the things that make them feel good and they care about.
I have one last question.
Awesome. Thank you.
Do you believe in homeschooling or going to school? Like, do you have an opinion on that?
So I'm saying I'm just a person, right? I'm not like an expert. I don't, people throw that word around and stuff. Like I just am a person. I think you all have like your own experiences. So what I believe, I don't know that it matters, but I think that any kind of schooling can be fantastic. I think homeschooling is great. I think creating your child's own journey is brilliant. Definitely, as I said, creating as many opportunities to like socialize, right? Because we are these social creatures first. And yeah, public school can be fantastic in certain settings, especially when you have brilliant teachers who just close their door and do what's right for your kids. That's rare because of the system is so big and complex and bureaucracy. There are fantastic private schools, hybrid programs of like partial homeschooling and unschooling. I mean, I think that it's kids are so different, their needs are so different, and some will thrive in certain settings, and others will totally struggle. And I think it's just so important to figure out like what's the best that you can do based on the kid that you have in front of you and the information that you know about that kid. What makes sense now, not in the future, but now. And they're going to change, the needs will change, and the solutions will change too. And you just do the best that you can for your kids now, despite what everybody else says. Because at the end of the day, no one cares when you go, like, if you go to Harvard and you're like, were you homeschooled, by the way? Right? It's like, there's a pathway there. Like, if you get to Harvard homeschooling, I think it's pretty valid. So don't let the haters, judge you.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions? You guys can email Sam. I have his email. Or join.
Oh, yeah.
Class or
Yeah,
open.
if you, I'll put the little resource in the chat again too. If you didn't grab that already, that will link you to our system, and I can email you that resource, as well as the different courses that we have that open just today, our courses and our summer camps for that matter.
Yeah.
So I'd love
My
to have
biggest
you.
takeaway from tonight is that screens don't have to be bad, because life is different now, and connecting in whatever way you can, be creative in that is what my takeaway was.
That's a great takeaway. That's what I want. Again, it's called 10 tips, but it's really about you making a big transformation, right? Our program's for 5 to 18-year-olds. Someone just asked in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
So, well, thank you all so much. Thank you for hanging out with me. Mina, thank you so much for creating this fantastic community of people who really care and show up. And I hope you can all like give yourself a tremendous amount of grace. Like you're here, you care, you're working so hard to show up for your kids, and you're doing the best that you can with what you have. And that's really good. You're here growing, you're reflecting, and you're open to new change and new opportunities. And what more can anyone ask of you? You're doing a great job.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Have a nice night, everyone. I hope to do this
Bye.
soon.
Yeah.
And I hope to see you all tomorrow at our open house.
Yeah.
Thank you.